You ever get bitten on the top of your head by a mosquito? Yeah, I do. It sucks.
I feel the pain. It is
There's
weird.
certain struggles we have.
Welcome back to the Liberty Portal podcast, everybody. I am one of your hosts, Joe Sheehan, and this is one of my co-hosts, David Rand.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the new space. Look at this. We look so great. Joe's been working hard on getting us more room, a little more elbow room, and a little more, control, I guess. Probably easier visually with
it feels
space.
More out of control than ever, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Change is always difficult. But yeah, follow me at Liberty_Rand on Twitter.
Cool.
And check us out.
Oh, you changed
Like,
up
subscribe.
You changed up your stuff.
Well, I mean, I had to. I got to go with the David Rand brand. And then additionally to that, like, David Rand was taken by my own account that I deactivated forever ago, and now I can get it back, and I'm trying to transfer it and actually kill it, but now it says it's taken. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I see.
I don't internet well, apparently. I thought I did, but I don't.
Well, at least you know what Google Sheets is.
Yeah, exactly. I do know what Google Sheets is.
Google Drive.
Unlike our guy in the back.
That's a dig at Evan. He's not familiar with the Google suite of products. It's all right, though.
He's a Microsoft guy.
Kyle Mack, how are you, sir?
Hello, you can follow me at Captain Quigley on Twitter, where I talk about penguins and such when I'm not on this podcast talking about politics and stuff. So,
Yes, absolutely. I still want to know more. We need to have a deep dive into the penguin lifestyle. What is that all about? What does it mean? What does it mean to you? Since everybody is like all plugging their Twitter and stuff, you can follow me on Twitter at the Joe Sheehan because I'm the best one.
I feel like you're more of an Instagram guy. Like you're much more.
I am. I definitely ruffle feathers on Instagram. At least that's my impression of it.
Well, it's an artist's medium, right? It's all visual.
That's true.
And it's all like that kind of stuff. Well,
But see, I mostly
Twitter's
just like spam repost political stuff onto my story, and I don't really do that much else. I post pictures of fish that I catch. That's basically it.
That's fair.
That's the place for it. Yeah, that Twitter's not really the space for fish.
No?
That and your Tinder profile, I assume? Those are the two places for the fish you catch?
I mean, all the ladies on Tinder love a good fish pic. This is science. It's confirmed.
This man can provide, sir.
It's all about the size of the fish. Trumpism.
It's a very big fish. I gotta say, some say it was the biggest fish.
The biggest fish. They said, sir, that is the biggest fish I've ever seen. Probably
17
30
hand lengths long.
30 inches or more, probably. Anyway. What are we talking about
We're
today?
gonna talk about the news today. Yeah, obviously you've noticed we have a new open.
That's an intro unlike any other.
Yeah,
that we've
right?
had so far.
Right.
So,
Well, new space, new intro, same crew, and we also got, obviously, like, follow, subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube. Give us those rankings. We don't have that many rankings. We got a lot more listeners on Spotify than we have, like, ratings. So give us some ratings out there, guys. Like, make sure that you like us. We have a ton of news. We can't possibly cover all the news. So if you keep building our audience by sharing and, advertising our podcast with us, we can start doing more news and then keep you on top of stuff a little easier.
That's right.
With maybe shorter segments or more frequent segments, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So first up, we got Hunter Biden. This is the son of the president, is expected to plead guilty for tax-related misdemeanor crimes as part of a plea agreement deal, and various other connected stories to that.
Yeah. Can we just first paint the picture, the constellation of things that he's sort of implicated in? Because he came into prominence briefly right around the 2020 election when his laptop, which he had left at a computer repair store, was given to the FBI or leaked somehow to journalists, and all of this really incriminating evidence, pictures and all this of him doing lewd acts and drugs and this and that, like, became available, right? Mm-hmm. And that was initially dismissed by the FBI and suppressed by social media, Twitter, etc.
And the FBI going into social media companies and telling them that this is going to be a thing that's happening.
Because
and it's just Russian hacker stuff, right?
Exactly, because it's Russian disinformation, and we don't want Russian disinformation affecting the election. Right? So that's the backstory here. Obviously, the public who got to see all this stuff is like, oh my God, like, this is the son of the president. He's doing all these criminal behaviors. Why isn't he getting any ramifications? Why isn't he being prosecuted for any of these crimes he's obviously committing? We have a picture on all these files. So now he finally is getting prosecuted for something.
For something. Well, something. So it's not
Is that related to the laptop?
There are emails on the laptop that are a component of this. but it's also subpoenaed information from what I read.
Gotcha.
So some of it is information that suggested coordination and the leverage of State Department resources privately for him. So, for example, his dad is the vice president at the time. He's using that relationship. Is that corruption, right? So they have to subpoena information to see if money actually changed hands in these arrangements. Additionally, that there are certain parts of the emails, such as we got to get the big guy in on this when talking about things. They never refer to Biden directly, but there's this euphemism as the big guy that a lot of people think is Biden. It's reasonable to assume that, because why else would you pay someone, what was it, $600,000 a year salary to be on an energy company in Ukraine?
Yeah, and that goes back to like 2016 stuff too.
Yeah,
is particularly with that was like, this is the reason why Trump got impeached the first time originally, because there was the quid pro quo with the weapons deal in order for the Ukrainian government to look into the Hunter Biden situation, right? And this was the whole reason that the initial impeachment happened on Trump.
And there's also the released audio that suggests that he had business deals in China as well that he was leveraging very specifically. And we have a released audio link that you can hear a lot of the conversation about what he's talking about. It does suggest using that sort of corruption of State Department resources, State Department connections in order to make money for him and his family. There was also, so what we have, the only like charges are failing to file his taxes correctly, right? For example, okay, so we're going to laugh. This is very serious crime. To be clear, filing your taxes wrong got Wesley Snipes put in jail. Wesley Snipes, right? If you or I were to file our taxes wrong to the degree that this guy did, we would be in jail too. So there's definitely some very serious, before we get into the funny part, very serious implications here about both electorally for the president's reelection, right? I mean, his son is potentially using him to make money in a very corrupt way. But also the unequal justice of what applies, what would apply to you or to me or to Wesley Snipes, because he doesn't have friends at the DOJ, doesn't apply to Hunter Biden because he's the son of the right person. And is that compatible with what it means to live in a free republic? It isn't.
No.
It's ruled by elite. It's an oligarchy.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thune at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management. Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com.
Which means Hunter Biden, what he did was he filed as business expenses hookers and sex parties, right?
That's part of the tax issue.
And I thought it was hilarious.
Imagine this guy filling out his taxes and he's looking at his expenses and he's like, I don't know what it costs to get into one of these parties, but 10 grand. I mean, it's a business expense. I mean, it's networking.
It's a networking event, right?
How could you? The chutzpah, right? The sheer amount. I mean, like, remember back in 2010, all these Tea Party groups were out there just doing their Tea Party thing, out there dressing up in, regalia, carrying a Gadsden flag and protesting. And they were prosecuted by the IRS for failing to file their taxes right for political speech spending. These, $10,000, small budget, tiny little groups who are just compiling money and then spending it to get permits to go to a park and wave a flag around. That was a major problem. We got people spending decades in jail for January 6th, but this guy, nothing, right? Like this tiny little probation slap on the wrist. It's absolutely absurd.
Well, it is, but it's evident that behavior is not frowned upon in those circles. I mean, there was a corollary story to this where a host of some of these like high profile like orgy parties in LA, right, came out and said Hunter Biden was there and then was banned from those parties, right? The guy who runs them, apparently. I will put a link to in the show notes. But it's like, okay, so we know this is happening. They're not mad that he's there. It's obviously well accepted. They're mad that they're being outed for, being there. So it's like, no, don't tell anyone. Of course not.
So Trump has a campaign finance violation for improperly paying, apparently Stormy Daniels in New York, and then filing that tax wrong is the accusation, and is potentially looking at an actual real lawsuit there. But this guy, probation, plead guilty for almost exactly the same crime and no real consequence at all.
Yeah.
Additionally, that last night, he was at a party at the White House, and there's video of him sitting right next to the head of the DOJ.
Interesting.
Yucking it up, right? So
rubbing elbows.
This is exactly the problem with the concentration of power and the lack of diffusion of power. When you have a ton of power going to the very top and a very large government that can control so much, that can make these arbitrary decisions rather than a accountable, small, decentralized government, this is the natural consequence. Oligarchies naturally form themselves. People will naturally start to bias themselves towards their what the founders called faction, right? To the people that they are most aligned with. So in order to fight faction, our entire system of government was designed to spread out the responsibility and make it difficult to have for someone to have enough connections in order to get favorable treatment. That was supposed to be our guarantee of the rule of law. Since the World War I, we've been consolidating these powers. Not really. World War I? That's what I said, or World War II? World War I. Woodrow Wilson. Mm-hmm. We've been consolidating these things, and that is what's caused the rise of this oligarchy. That our current version of it. There are oligarchies before that too, right? But there's a natural law of human relationships. Probably that's a what's that? What's that? Neocon that wrote that?
James Burnham.
Yeah. So that's a classic, a good example of that. What is the solution? The solution is not only don't reelect Biden, but the strategy for conservatives and libertarian types need to start thinking carefully about, okay, how do we make sure that we hold accountable people without going over the line of the law when they violate the law, and hold them to account when we get power, rather than just shuffling all the rugs and focusing on a tax cut, right? We got to really think about, tax cuts are important. They're good too, but thinking carefully about how do we make sure that if Republicans gain control, how do they hold these sorts of actors accountable? The same way that the Democrats held accountable a bunch of randos that walked into the Capitol on January 6th.
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said, people align themselves with factions. They look out for their friends. I think that is perfectly human nature. So maybe the question is, as voters, how do we keep from putting people into these positions of power that are going to inevitably abuse them? Is there a way to avoid that? Or is anyone who is particularly drawn to be a member of Congress, president, a member of a cabinet, or whatever, any position of authority or power, are they naturally drawn to this place where, well, I'm going to just kind of fall in line with the people that I'm around, the people that, I'm associating with, because I want to be well-liked, I want to be respected, and I want to be part of this club, this exclusive group, right? Is there a way to even avoid that?
Yeah,
Can we vote for someone that's better than that?
I think there's a couple steps between the voters and that situation that's going on in D.C. You need a culture change in D.C., right? Part of that's process. We need a process change so we can get the culture change. We need a culture change so we can get the process change, right?
Well, right, and that's my question is, how do you change the process without it happening from the ground up?
Right, so is your candidate talking about how the culture in D.C. is corrupt and terrible, or are they talking about how we got to bring back stability and make sure that everyone gets a cut in the share, right? Are they talking about how much money they can bring into your state, or are they talking about how much government they're going to cut and get out of your life? Those are some simple signals that anyone who isn't keeping track on the news can follow. And I think in general, at least then you have a standard to hold someone to account to. Now, second to that, we need a media and a press that isn't partisan, or at least is diverse enough, and people who listen to divergent voices enough, that press that fall into a partisan trap are held accountable to that. And so there's a disincentive to become that. So one of the best things you can do is stop listening to, the oligarchy media, and, spread the message of the more decentralized, more anti-establishment media that is actually trying to work to talk about what the real problems are, not just keep you distracted with all of these kind of, silly stories. I guess the submarine doesn't qualify as a silly story anymore, but it first thing that came out of my mind was like, submarine. But that's that's an example, right? We talked about that all week. We didn't talk as much about the Biden thing as I think would be due if this was another regime. I think the media would have focused on it way more.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the story of the submarine thing is a total tragedy. It's terrible. I don't mean to underplay that. I'm just saying, in the context of we are fighting a war in Ukraine, perhaps because of connections that the president has to an energy company in Ukraine. and a long-term like corruption scandal within his family, that's the survival of the entire human race on the line. And we're talking about submarines, right? Like that's
I've heard it called possibly the greatest corruption scandal in human history, or in all of like American history at very least. I mean, it has those kind of implications.
right. And presidents have lost because of that. Warren Harding lost because of a corruption scandal having to do with like investments out west way back in the day. Good thing for us, because that's why we got Calvin Coolidge, the best president ever. Calvin Coolidge.
Really?
Oh yeah,
He's up.
Why?
He's up there.
he's way up there. Cool cow.
I don't know
Silent Cal.
anything about
Oh yeah, the guy was a straight baller. Okay, so not only did he in a recession cut spending and taxes, he demilitarized. He stood up to unions, even though he was a bit of a progressive on some issues. Amity Shales has a great biography called Coolidge that is just wonderful, and it talks about him. He suffered tremendous personal loss, but kept this presence, this really great direction. And his way he could articulate freedom, and like he doesn't get nearly enough credit. But one of the reasons why he's not talked about is because he never went to war, and he lived in a time of peace and prosperity. Right.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
And it was a while ago too, so that's another.
But
reason why
it is
people-
important. The Warren G. Harding thing too is very important, because his presidency was marked with scandals, and he was called this like womanizer and things like this. And he was very much like the anti-establishment figure at the time as well. Like his whole campaign slogan was "Return to normalcy." Sounds very similar to like "Make America Great Again," right? Like it's very much like, let's stop doing all this nonsense from the Woodrow Wilson era, and let's kind of like get back on track. And then that leads into Silent Cal coming in and being this prosperous president, right? So, and it just so happened that he just started getting marked with all these crazy scandals throughout the end of his presidency. So it is kind of like who they choose to get hit with scandals, because every president's got scandals, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like,
Interesting. But they don't talk about him because nothing eventful happened during his presidency.
yeah, well, it's like today
Effectively.
you'll hear this all the time. It's like Obama never had any scandals or anything. It's like I could name like 12. It's like it's like Fast and Furious. There was like a whole gun running scheme. There's American citizens getting drone bombed. Like all this stuff happened.
Benghazi.
Right? Benghazi, yeah, maybe or not. I think that's just kind of like a foreign policy blunder. I don't know if I would call it a scandal.
That's fair.
but
That's fair.
But the cover up of it was pretty.
the cover up
central.
of it,
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like there was a reason why Benghazi had many post hearings after Obama wasn't even president anymore, right?
Well,
still
I guess
following
one of
through
the
on
scandals
the cover-up.
was oh, sorry, I was thinking Benghazi is what you said. I was just thinking Libya. I was thinking Muammar Gaddafi.
right,
Sorry,
right.
Yeah, Benghazi. Yeah, that was definitely a scandal. Right.
But invading 8 countries is not a scandal, right?
No.
Which is ironic.
No,
without congressional delegation,
it's presidential.
That's par for the course.
That's what makes him a president. Great example. Another game of this dynamic. Trump, obviously slandered by the press every day from the time he was a candidate. As soon as he got in, the first time he dropped a bomb in Afghanistan, like he became president today.
No, I remember like there was like in the corporate media, like on CNN, you had like these big talking heads being like, "This is the first time I've ever felt that President Trump was really a strong president."
It's like a presidential bar mitzvah to drop a bomb.
And
It's
it
like,
was
like
dropping
got him
a
in the
bomb.
chair.
It was dropping a bomb on an airstrip in Syria. Like I remember what the bomb was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
It's
typical.
ridiculous.
So that's kind of like the culture of the blob. So ultimately, I think there's 2 different ways of looking at it. And I'm not sure that there's any one right answer. One is get into DC quietly, work your way up to leadership, and then change everything, right? That's an idea. The other one is go there, say what you think is true, stand on your principles, take the arrows, and change the culture from the bottom. Top down, bottom up. You probably need a little bit of both to actually get to the place we want to go to. But I think the bottom-up solution is usually the better solution, both because you don't compromise your values on the way there, right? Because if
I don't know. I feel like a lot of people that I know that go in as the bottom-up solution end up compromising their values on the way there,
Oh, sure.
they stop filling in the bottom-up, mentality.
Right. And there might be a shelf life to that, especially if you're the first one in, right? If you're taking all the arrows first, there could be more to it. But if everyday folks are thinking, okay, what kind of questions can I ask? Especially, if you're in Montana, go to a Lincoln Reagan dinner when they're in town. Ask them a question to their face. Like that's very easy to do in a state like Montana. If you're in another state, those get a little more complicated. But if you want to, you can ask a senator a question. You just got to be the right place, right time, and get there. Right? Start showing up to your local central committee. Start talking to them there. The same thing, if you have an LPP candidate or Libertarian Party candidate, you want to hold them to account. You got to show up to the party meetings and start talking to them. See what their real victory theory is. See what their real philosophy is. It only happens by engagement. There's no zero effort way to do this, right? You can't change the country just by listening to a podcast. Sorry. I wish you could.
And you can't change the country just by doing a podcast either. So don't worry, we're out there doing stuff too.
Yeah, right. but it's the network effects of that do, right? It's the people being equipped with the knowledge, hopefully with the history, like we just covered a little bit, the philosophy, like we're just trying to articulate and kind of connect dots with, and then additionally that the implementation into a theory of victory that allows you to hold account the people who matter, who will make the decisions.
I think it's, just to circle back briefly to one thing you mentioned, it is important to stop patronizing, to stop consuming content of outlets that are not giving you accurate, impartial news, right? I mean, and I think we're seeing the effects of that right now. We saw BuzzFeed News go down a few months ago. We saw Vice just file for bankruptcy not too long ago. And we know that both of those have had perhaps, points in their history where they've been better or worse, but obviously have trended in one particular direction, and that's very partisan left. And obviously that's where most of the media resides, most of the legacy media, as I call it, or the oligarchy media. I like that term too. But obviously, we're witnessing this decentralization of media right now, and we're a part of it on this podcast. And there are, dozens of other shows as well that are really trying to do the same thing and get people engaged in a different way to think about the events that are happening in our world. And I think that's super important. Engage with those. Whatever you can to support us and other shows is great. Like that really, patronize sponsors, use the discount codes and all that stuff that they have. Like that's really, really important because it allows us to continue to dig and to do better journalism, better reporting, give you more clear and concise opinions and all that stuff.
Totally agree. And a great example of that on that, like kind of other news, is the Joe Rogan RFK Jr. story, which happened this week. RFK Jr. goes on the Joe Rogan. He talks about all the greatest hits, man. He's talking about vaccines. I mean, you can't talk about vaccines, right? We're probably already gotten taken down just by me saying that. He talks about the intelligence community. And he talks about the foreign policy disaster. He talks about inflation and all this stuff. It was really a great interview. But of course, because it was a great interview, all the mainstream press, all the oligarchy press, I love that. We're going to use that from now on. The oligarchy press lost their minds, especially on Twitter. And we found, everything from the new shift of malinformation. Now, remember, malinformation is information that goes against the narrative, is now been rebranded as anti-science information.
Only when it's targeted at science, though, right?
Right.
Because there could be malinformation outside of scientific realm. But when when you're attacking the Lord and Savior science, it's anti-science.
Right.
Well, and I think the important thing is for a little bit of context too. So you end up having this guy, Professor Peter Hotez, who's been on Rogan's show a handful of times, and I think the last time he was on was kind of at the very beginnings of the pandemic, and he was talking about like the necessity of the vaccines and all this stuff, right? He starts going out and just starts tweeting at Joe, basically saying that like having these people on, it's like this fascist way of doing things, and he just starts. It's all this stuff that anybody that's tuned in knows the tactics that they use. So Joe comes out and says, Peter, $100,000 to the charity of your choice, and you and RFK Jr. can come have a debate on my podcast. And since then, this guy Peter Hotez, who is a doctor, he works in vaccines, I believe. I don't know.
I want to say he's a public health official, but I don't know.
I get weird vibes from him. He's like a guy that's like dressing up like he's pretending to be a doctor on TV. Like I get very weird vibes from him.
He's got the Bill Nye the Science Guy,
he's got
bow
that
tie thing. Yeah.
He's got that because like if you watch some of the old clips from him, like especially on Rogan, it's like, wow, this guy's like, I don't know. It's like he couldn't defend any of his stances or anything. Like he's not good. Like a good figure for this, but he made like $50 million off of this stuff. Like I don't know, it's weird vibes. But since then, this $100,000 bet or $100,000 charity donation has risen to, I think the last number I saw is $2.6 million of people contributing money in to have this debate, and the guy just will not do it because he thinks that it'd be highlighting misinformation people, anti-science people, the whole ringer. But,
and the classic of this is that you have a guy who's supposedly the more qualified individual debating an environmental lawyer, right? This guy, if he really believes in what he believes, should be able to go in there and just wipe the floor with this guy. Be like, hey, you haven't heard this study. You haven't done this. What about this ratio? What about this statistic? Of course, if he knows the material, he should be able to debate it. No. But the response on Twitter was, it is to give a microphone to the wrong people to have a qualified person in the field debate somebody who is unqualified, right? Which is like, how do you do education? How do you think about popular sovereignty in a republic where everything is politicized if you can't debate things publicly? If it's fascist to debate things publicly, that's an insane proposition.
Yes.
The LA Times called this interview a threat to your health and our democracy.
There's that word, our democracy. That's the religion right there.
Right. So that's a good sign that you are being manipulated if you read someone says your public health and our democracy. Because the idea of democracy, at least in the expansive classical liberal sense, included free speech and free popular engagement with issues of relevance. That was the idea of informed individuals being able to have a stake in their government, was that they would be able to participate, not just in voting, but also in speech about these sorts of issues, about the public dialogue around these issues. And like, if you read like John Stuart Mill on Liberty, classic work of classical liberalism, what he believed was just like market prices, work together in a spontaneous order way to design a price for things, right? You have all these producers and consumers coming together to negotiate to then find the right price of grain so that you can allocate resources to grain appropriately and get bread where it needs to go. So too is truth with free speech. We have all these people engaging and talking about an issue and then sussing out what's true, what's the wheat, it's a torturous analogy, what's the chaff, what is the good thing, what's the bad thing, what is true, and then that idea rises to the top. And to lose belief in that is the greatest sin of progressivism. Right? That was to name the devil, right? To name the thing that's sitting in the background that's informing all of this was a particular set of ideas. And I don't mean modern progressivism, although it still bears a lot of these strains, right? It's changed a lot. Was the progressivism of the progressive era from 1880 to the 1930s, in there, of this core idea that society would be so much better if we had an oligarchy of scientists to run everything. That idea is corrosive to classical liberalism, and it has destroyed so much of our social order. And this is what they're calling on. This is the religion they're pulling from to justify their views. And they're never going to say, "Oh, if we just had the doctors run everything would be better." Right?
Well,
but what they're going to do is they're going to say, anyone who talks about this that doesn't have the qualifications that I think they shouldn't be allowed to talk or should be ignored by responsible people.
Right. Well, and I just pulled up an article from the New York Times here. It's an opinion piece that says you can't win a debate against someone who disregards facts. And there's a very kind of there's a hubris to this of like, we know what the facts are. Like the science is settled, right? Like we always heard that through COVID, is that the science is settled, and anybody that goes against what we currently know as the facts is like, they're just misinformation.
Pause for the Cosmoid Cracker Fresh beverage.
Get yourself a Zesty.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to unf the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, post-biotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a post-biotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's ZESTYBEV.com.
Yeah, and ignore. I obviously have a bot that auto blocks anybody that works for the New York Times. So that's why you see the blocked on there.
I love that. That's hilarious.
It's a strange choice. You're like, nope, don't need it. No, but that's you're not wrong. Like that's a great perspective.
Well, and I want to circle back to something that you said, about this idea that if just the scientists and the doctors run everything, the world will be so much better. We actually had an opportunity to experience that for the last 3 years during COVID. Mm-hmm. And how did it feel for everyone? It was not that great. We shut down the economy. We perpetrated all of these, different systems of oppression and control on society that we then discover in hindsight are less effective across the board. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about masks or vaccines or whatever. Lockdowns were less effective and had more deleterious effects than we ever could have perceived. And yet the very people who you think should be responding and using the scientific method to adapt and change to new data were so locked to their ideology that they could not possibly see that they were doing the exact opposite of what they should be doing if they were really scientists.
Oh
That's
man, it was Eric Weinstein had a great thread on it. I'll maybe give it to you for Joe for the show notes because
Sure.
we won't go through the entire thing. But he had this great thread just imploring Peter Hotez to come and do the debate because he says things along the lines of like the science in air quotes is fighting against science, and it's just kind of like we're playing these weird language games right now, and no actual sciencing is being done at all. It's just pure religious speculation on all sides of this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's worthwhile is going and looking at Eric Weinstein's Twitter thread here.
Well, that gets to the heart of why progressivism's wrong about this idea that you could have a intellectual elite run everything, and that is because there's always a negotiation of values, right? Liberty or safety. Which one do we decide on, right? I would always, Thomas Jefferson quote, I would always rather have the inconveniences of too much liberty than the tyranny of too much safety. So the most important question in politics is who decides? Do you decide the value exchange, the trade-off between liberty and safety, or does the government decide for you? And you say, well, I want safety. Great. You control your life for safety, and other people can control their life for other ways. That's why the role of government in a pandemic should be to equip people with the right information so that they can make the best contextual decisions based upon their individual circumstance to protect themselves and others, and make sure that they have, that they can take the reasonable steps, because only they know, only they have the knowledge. This is the Hayekian knowledge problem. This is why socialism fails. It's also why this fails. They only they have the localized knowledge to be able to make the determination of those exchange of values to live that out in the real world. That's the advantage that liberty has over statism, is that a singular solution can't include all the information that you need to help everyone, while in liberty you can, right? And there's going to be trade-offs, and there's going to be bad things that happen there too. But the question is like, which burden would you rather have, and who decides what burdens, what those costs are? And that's where we got this great video from Thomas Sowell talking about this very specifically when it comes to the V word.
The V word. Man, we are so far down that rabbit hole. You can just go ahead and say it.
Yeah. Sorry, I was not.
There are no solutions. There are just trade-offs. Safety is a classic example. Every year, so many hundreds of thousands of people are vaccinated against measles, smallpox, those kinds of things. Now, this saves several hundred lives, that it's estimated. It also causes brain damage to about 30 kids a year. Now, there are no solutions in that. There are just trade-offs. What about there are?
So that's if that makes you uncomfortable, perfect. That's exactly how you should feel. If you say that, you're like, well, what should I do? Perfect, because you are making the decision, right? Now, if you don't want your kid to get those vaccines because you're worried about their vaccine sensitivity, a lot of school districts are going to force you to do so, right? What do you do?
Pick a different school.
Yeah, or hopefully you have a regime where you can afford to, right? Or right. Homeschool or whatever. But that's the whole point, is like, who decides, right? Who navigates that trade-off? Thinking the world in terms of trade-off is the adult way to think about it. Thinking as there's an answer, a science, or the science is a utopian way to think of the world. It's an idealistic way that a child would choose.
Well, it's also worth remembering is in the beginnings of all this, how much stuff was being said and censored that has turned out to be true. For instance, we had this Wall Street Journal article confirming the Wuhan Institute of Virology scientists who were sickened in November 2019. 2019 is important there because we locked down much later than that. I remember, I think it was like January or February of 2020 when Zero Hedge got taken down for reporting on all of this stuff about the Wuhan lab, and it got completely struck from Twitter, and they lost their Twitter account. This is before Elon Musk obviously had it. It's important, and now all this stuff is basically just like public knowledge. We're all just like, yeah, Wuhan lab, yeah, obviously lab leak. But at the point in time, if you didn't talk about how it was because of bats or bat soup in a Wuhan wet market, like, you would get removed from social media companies. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling it might be one of the reasons why I got removed from some of my social media.
Well, and I think it's part of the reason why Dr. Hotez does not want to debate, because he's entwined in that whole scandal as well. He also makes a lot of money off of this stuff too.
Like
Right.
people getting their boosters is money in his pockets. Like that's a very important thing on this.
Something that I don't think a lot of people know is that scientists who do research on vaccines or any drug for that matter can get royalties from them, from the drug companies. Who is it that owns the patent on the COVID vaccines? I think it's the NIH. NIH scientists, those that are supposed to be looking out for our public health, are getting financial rewards from Pfizer and from Moderna and the other vaccine manufacturers for selling them. For the more that they sell, the more money they make. That if that is not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is.
And this,
And
this is a point that RFK Jr. has been bringing up in all these
Exactly.
podcasts too.
Yes.
Is that there's no real firewall that exists here, and you have people just bouncing between organizations as regulators and as businessmen, basically.
Right.
And they're getting all these profits from this stuff, right?
Right. And I think the thing that people can take from this is, other than just a sense of like, oh, great, like, well, the fox is watching the hen house, what am I going to do about that? Is really just to understand, like, this should play into your calculus of your decision making. Understand that the people that are saying this is totally okay and safe and good for you are also getting paid to tell you that, right? So just, that doesn't mean take it or don't take it, whatever it is. If it's a vaccine or it's something else, just think about that. How does that change your impression of their opinion? Do you hold it as the gold standard anymore? I sure don't. I definitely don't.
Right. It's kind of like a tobacco exec being like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with tobacco. Right.
Right. It's good for you.
And now you're like, tobacco's objectively bad for you. Sure. Yeah.
Right.
We have more evidence now than we had back then, back when that was a debate topic. But the question is, should you treat it with the same amount of skepticism? Right. And,
Exactly.
and to be clear, we're not saying don't get vaccinated.
No.
What we're saying is there's a trade-off for everything. The ideal situation for medicine is individualized medicine. Right. And there's some great opportunities in technology to get there where we can say, have a better predictive model for, basically testing ahead of time. Will this affect you negatively? But we'll never develop that technology if we say we can't ask the question, do vaccines sometimes have negative unintended consequences for the people who take them? If we just sweep that on the rug and just ignore as a society because we're afraid what the rubes will think, and I say that with irony, what the rubes will think of there being a trade-off in this area, then we'll never develop the technology to mitigate against those risks.
Exactly.
Which is the real fear to me.
Yeah, well, and the core thing here is like that's the thing is like everybody should be able to make the voluntary choice of what they want to do with their body, right? If you think that you're going to be subject to needing some extra protection towards a certain disease or something like that, then you're going to want to make the calculus and maybe lean in favor of that. If you're more risk tolerant and you're kind of waiting for more information, then you might want to wait or whatever. Like,
right?
It's the problem is what we end up having here is where you have governments just coming in and mandating or like stripping away certain freedoms if you don't have these things. It's like I remember during the pandemic response, I watched all these libertarian folk and these libertarian organizations basically saying like, basically praising the idea of vaccine passports and things like that, which I would thought was crazy that I would see libertarian folks doing this. And then I watched other entities that I wouldn't be surprised that they would do this. But it's just like, I remember watching this, I was like, oh, there's like a core freedom is being stripped away here. And they're going to try to like layer you with like, well, you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to do this. So you might as well do it. And it's kind of like easing you into it kind of a thing.
It's Cass Sunstein, basically smart regulations, right? It was the idea was just that you don't mandate something. What you do is you close off all the alternatives so that someone has to go that way, or you incentivize them to go that way by making it slightly punishing to do something else. So rather than ban guns, you put taxes on ammo. That's a good classic example. Well, another one is like, rather than just saying you have to stay at home, you basically say you can't go to restaurants anymore, right? Or if you go to a restaurant, it has to be all these rules and make it impossible. Or nonsensical rules like COVID can be transmitted while you're walking to your table, but not while you're sitting at your table. Things like that, where you're basically setting all these things in, no matter how nonsensical it is, to create the result that you want, which is just more people doing the behavior you want without actually having to force them to do so. It's a strange way to get to soft tyranny. And one of the interesting things there about the vaccine passports I want to note too. So some people were thinking, okay, the government needs to establish a vaccine passport. That is a terrible idea. Totally agree. The question is if business owners say, I only want to be, my risk safety analysis is that as a business owner, I think everyone needs to be vaccinated to come into my store. Should they be able to do that? Right? So free association rights from a libertarian point of view would say yes. So how do they get that signal? vaccine passport, a vaccine card, something that says, passport's a weird word for this because it's private, but basically saying I'm vaccinated, so I should be allowed to go here. A lot of people push back on this and say, you should never be able to discriminate against anybody. But classically, the libertarian, the freedom philosophy has said discrimination is actually a good thing, right? You discriminate against who you
Freedom
date.
of association. So
Right.
First
You
Amendment
discriminate
right.
against who you marry. You discriminate who your business partners are. You discriminate all the time. These are healthy things, right? There's a jerk way to discriminate, right? You could be a jerk about it, or you could be a polite adult about it and say, hey, I just don't think this partnership's working out. That's to me, what got confused, especially on the right, was there was this analogy made, which is that the pandemic is like an invading army. And the best response for an army, if you're thinking about militaristically,
That's a mouthful.
that's a word. Red leather, yellow leather, is to, with that argument by analogy, led them, a lot of people to think, well, this is the exception to the general rule of freedom, and therefore compromise their values in a very systematic way. And I agree with that was an error. The best response to an invading army might not be a centralized command. Look at the Taliban.
Yeah.
Look at all of the major armies that have repelled using asymmetrical warfare or empires over hundreds of years, and none of it's centralized. So why would relative people who believe in decentralization and the power of decentralization, information, and people acting on independently with an overall vision driving them, why would you believe that the better response would be to centralize everything with a government passport?
See, the thing that I think a lot of these libertarian types that were talking about vaccine passports and businesses and things like that was they were kind of not looking at second and third order down the road type of stuff. Is like, yes, I completely agree. I think businesses should have complete freedom of association. I don't think that I think they should be able to discriminate against anybody. I think it's private ownership, right? But one of the problems is a lot of the information and the incentives that lied behind that it wasn't just like, this is a free market and everybody gets to do all this stuff. Right. That's not how America works. America's not a free market.
Or even close to this vision,
close.
right?
Yeah. Like that would be my ideal, is businesses, and they're able to make their own decisions. But right now there's all these incentive structures that is polluting the decision-making process right now. So like, yeah, vaccine passports or vaccine businesses being able to discriminate based on vaccine, like they could do it. Like I would be open to them being allowed to do that. But it's like right now, that's not where we're at. We're not there. Yeah. like, and it's the same thing with like the social media companies. It's like you had all these libertarian types saying like, oh, private company can do what it wants. But it's like these aren't private companies. They're getting government funding here in grants, and you have the FBI collusion that's going on. Everything came out with the Twitter files, right? Like, you got to have a little bit more of a broader look at these things. It's not as simple as private company can do what it wants, because there's all these other incentive structures in play, right, because the governments are involved. Right.
You want to do a combination there. I totally agree. You want to do a combination of both. Skepticism of large corporations, right, is warranted on its face, right? If only not because there's something wrong with being large or being a corporation. Nothing wrong with corporations. I'm not one of those people that think corporations are somehow anti-freedom. It's that in our system, as it's existed for over 100 years, the purpose of the state is to gather everyone and move them all in the same direction, right? And so their biggest efforts are going to be placed on what move the most amount of people, which is going to be large corporations. So they have an incentive in order to create those relationships and the cronyism, right? Got this new $9 billion loan that the federal government's going to give Ford in order to build a new competitor to Tesla, right? For them to do more electric cars. You think when the regulator comes down and be like, hey, here's your loan. Also, we want you to do this little tweak here, make this little change, right? Social media companies, we know the FBI was doing all kinds of crazy things, making suggestions. And what's a suggestion when you're the monopoly of force? Mm-hmm. Completely inappropriate way to do that. On the other side of it, they already had this capability because of laws that Congress passed that were specifically designed to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda and those guys. So it got turned from the foreign policy of international terrorism to domestic policy, and then was forced on us, specifically enforced using COVID as the excuse to pivot those resources that way.
Yeah, just people need to have a higher level of analysis on these things. Like it's one of my biggest problems with the libertarians the last few years is I think that they got really stuck in their dogma and they weren't able to kind of see beyond. It's like they were already looking as if things were in the perfect framework that we needed to have, and it's like you need to have a little bit deeper. Like the world's not as it seems at this point. Right.
One of the interesting wrinkles there is that states that then went the opposite direction and said you have no free association rights and banned it. right? And said like you can't even if you say for example Evan decided to be an entrepreneur and he started his own private label vaccine passport, right? And said I'm going to certify whether or not you have a vaccine by confirming the information and look, you have a handy mobile app. You couldn't in the state of Montana now do that, right? Because it's now illegal to say to discriminate on vaccine status. Is that a bigger wrong than the alternative? The status quo we're in was kind of vague whether or not you could. I don't know.
I think if we had a more free incentive structure, businesses would you would end up just having these businesses that would be like, no, come on, I want your money.
Yeah.
And then other ones that would be like, oh, we're super cautious. And then I also think insurance is probably going to be where the biggest factors in the decision making is. There's going to be certain like insurance requirements, and that's going to be
Almost all the states also waived all the insurance liability.
Yeah, see,
almost all of them did.
Like that's the thing is like all of our incentives are just completely screwed up.
Yeah.
Like we can't have good decision making when all of our incentives are just so intertwined and there's all these different variables that are being like corroded
through the legislative process.
Yeah, because of the legislative process and just the general monopolistic nature of the state.
Right. And it was a conflict of visions, right? The vision was, if we're going to discriminate, are we going to discriminate on vaccine status or not? And then if I don't think we should, because I don't want to be discriminated against, I'm a lawmaker in this case, I'm going to make sure no one can be. And so they pass a law saying that. And not every state did that, but some did. So there's an interesting thing. There's like, what is the vision we're shooting for? How do we get to that vision without compromising our own values? And then the negotiation process to get there using the realities of politics as they sit. So there's a lot of steps between there, and a lot of people just kind of get lost in like, I got a vision and it's very disconnected from the reality. So I'm gonna make a stab. And I think a lot of people made bad stabs during COVID, including myself. Like, not everyone got
their
it all right.
heuristics were wrong. Like you had bad heuristics. If you were confused about what everything was happening, it's because you didn't have like the baseline correct and you couldn't predict it because of it. Something worth noting, we kind of passed over this, is in regards to the RFK thing, is that he's now been, he's getting banned from a bunch of social media platforms because of this. A bunch of content's getting taken down. His interview with Jordan Peterson got taken down.
Yeah, his interview with Mike Tyson talking about falconing got taken down.
And that's from like 2 years ago. Too.
Yeah, right. I mean, he wasn't even a candidate at the time.
And Theo Vaughn.
Theo Vaughn, that was also like a 2-year-old.
Which is very strange, right? I mean, like that like this person is now flagged on that platform. Now, we don't have any evidence that the government's doing that.
Well, remember...
So how should we think about it, given the heuristics?
Well, the incentive structure, though. Like, there is the incentive structure that exists, that already has existed. Like, these just seem to be the same mechanisms that have been used for the past several years that we've watched happen, right? Like, Instagram, everybody that was using his campaign email account on Instagram also was getting banned, right? Like, his entire campaign staff was getting banned because they were using his email. So expand on this a little bit. Like it's like,
so what is the incentive there for a social media company to ban him?
ESG scores and things like this. Like
Is
there's all these. Well, that's like one.
Or
right?
it's like,
that's one example. There's probably a ton of variables.
Well, but we do know, like for example, the government has been emailing social media companies and saying, "Here's a list of people we don't like anymore." Right, and sometimes the social media companies are like, "Yeah, we agree," and got rid of them. Did that email happen with RFK? We don't know. But we do know that government has their little fingers in all this, and so therefore it's understandable that people get very without evidence conspiratorial about it, because it's understandable, because the evidence we do have is very damning of the government's activities in the space.
Well, and we know certain words get flagged for YouTube monetization and video removal and things like that, and strikes. Like that's why we say the jab and the V word and all this stuff, right?
Right.
Like we all know it exists. Like,
well, I think it's interesting. Parallel to his sort of this clampdown on social media that's trying to seemingly scrub RFK from, that public square, so to speak, he just topped a poll for favorability, net favorability. So, how much do you like this person versus how much do you dislike this person? He got the highest score over both Biden and Trump.
Wow.
Yeah. So, despite the fact that social media companies, and perhaps in collusion with some form of, the intelligence state or what have you, are trying to curtail his visibility to the public, it's not working. He's going on every podcast that there is that has really great reach. Obviously, the Joe Rogan podcast.
This is probably going to be the highest performing podcast of Joe Rogan's career, probably.
I mean, it's It's so far probably is. Yeah, for sure.
Bigger than Alex Jones.
I think maybe so.
You said the AJ word.
Yeah, we're super banned now. It's fine. But I mean, I think it's interesting. It's proof in the pudding that the decentralized media revolution is working. It's changing the game here because he hasn't been on any network news or anything like that.
Well, remember there was the ABC interview like a month or two ago, and they asked him about his vaccine stances, his V-word stances.
It's too late.
But before the interview started, it was a thing. It was like another recorded thing of the interviewer saying like, "There's this stuff we had to cut because of misinformation and all this stuff." And she gave this whole tirade, and then mid-interview in the thing, they cut it, and then they cut to this point where it's her saying, "So a lot of your family disagrees with you about your positions. Why are you going against your family?" Like, and they cut away from the vaccine information to that, right? Like, it's very clear what's happening here.
Yeah, obviously they have an agenda and they're executing it, but I love the fact that it's not working, at least not according to this poll. And it's very early, and this is net favorability. It's not if the election were held tomorrow, would you vote for this person over this person? So, what does it mean?
I have no idea what it means. Was that a question for
me? That was rhetorical.
Yeah. So, new topic because we need to talk about this.
Yes.
China.
They love me.
In Cuba. So, in early June, a White House spokesman confirmed reports that the Cuba-based Chinese Signals Intelligence Collection Center has been targeting the U.S. since 2019. So, what that is, let me unpack that a little bit. So, think of the NSA, right? National Security Agency. And they intercept information from everybody. We now know. Thanks, Ed. Oh, yeah. And interpret that information and use that to do security analysis that they then pass on to other agencies or do operations on and things like that. So this signals interception is what that is, right? It's grabbing other people's communications, decrypting them, and then understanding what it is and what the strategic meaning is for your country. So they have established, since 2019, they've been getting our information here in America and using that for their own signals intelligence agency. It's interesting to me, especially, talk about the media narrative here. I hate podcasts that only talk about media narratives, so we're going to try not to do that, but this is becoming the theme of this one. This was not talked about. This came out and it was silence. I was looking at it in early June when I first came across it. I put out a tweet about it. I didn't see anyone else talk about it this entire time. Now, this week, we have another story that came out that China has plans to build a new troop training facility in Cuba. Think about that. Cuba is less than 100 miles from Florida at some points. That is troops from China in Cuba, very close by. Now, my initial response was, this is going to happen, and it's going to get ignored until someone discovers it, and it's going to blow up and get really big. Maybe it'll be our podcast that blows it up. Yeah. But we got this. But the interesting thing here is how I predict that everyone's going to lose their mind, especially the war hawks, going to say this is an aggressive action by China and it's terrible. And how dare they put troops so close to our border? Meanwhile, we are literally running troops in Poland, in Romania, only a couple hundred miles from the border of Russia.
How far?
And saying it's obviously a defensive alliance that could not possibly ever prompt anyone to believe it's aggressive, despite NATO's history of aggression. And how dare Putin not see that it says defensive alliance and therefore believe that this is somehow provocative and therefore be the casus belli, just or unjust, for the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, I have a question pertaining directly to China and the U.S.'s potential aggression towards China. How far is Taiwan from China?
About the same distance, like 30 miles, something like that. It's very, very close. Yeah.
So, I mean, is this a tit for tat scenario?
And also the Chinese doctrine is that Taiwan is China.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's also
our doctrine is the Monroe Doctrine. History lesson. The Monroe Doctrine says the Western Hemisphere is the United States. If any power gets in there, it's equivalent of the act of war. What gives us the right to do that?
We've got more bombs.
Everything's predicated on force.
Might makes right. That's the rule, right? That says that, right? So when we say, "Hey guys," that's a different question than moral thinking, right? And if I may, what I appreciate about the philosophy of liberty is it applies moral thinking in all circumstances. And it says, hey, I don't know what the right answer is here, but this is maybe the moral cost. Right? Here's the moral cost of what you're thinking about. So if your country is in charge of your country and not in charge of the world, what is the just role of your country in the world's foreign policy, in your foreign policy? If we have the Monroe Doctrine that applies here, why doesn't it apply to China? Why isn't the South China Sea China's? Why is the Strait of Hormuz not Iran's? Why is the Black Sea, at least the components of it that are, relevant to Georgia, Russia, things like that, not relevant to the actors there, and first relevant to us, way on the other side of the planet? We have a standard that we don't obey and that we then apply on others, and then we're surprised when others use their standard and call us hypocrites, right? And say, hey, you guys are the world empire here. You're not what you say you are. We have this myth that we believe that we're not that. But then we act like an empire, and then we say, but we're not. We're the good guys, right? We're the ones saying, hey, China, you have less right to the South China Sea than we do because we're afraid you're going to shut down trade. Why would China shut down trade in the South China Sea? What possible reason could they have? They're completely reliant on trade, right? The South China Sea goes down China to Africa and Indonesia and all these other areas where they have trade relations. Why would they shut that down? Oh, well, they might constrain it for our ships. Well, why would they do that? Maybe because we're militarizing something that they claim in their Monroe Doctrine to be their territory, Taiwan. So, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying any solutions here. All I'm doing is pointing out problems. It doesn't mean that what we should necessarily do is, literally give Taiwan China. I'm not saying that. But there's a whole bunch of variables here. What is Japan's relationship with this? Would Japan have a problem with China sitting in the South China Sea? What about South Korea? Also uses those for trade lanes. What would their response be? Why is it on us to make this decision? Why wouldn't we be supporting our allies in this space to actually have a stake in their own defense, right? There's way more, at least I'm not talking about complete Fortress America stuff. You can be a complete realist and, see the world in terms of, hey, this is power. This is ultimately, we got to wield power in a way that, keeps Americans safe and free. So we got to do something here. Well, there's way more restrained, way more realistic ways to go about doing that in China than just militarizing Taiwan, putting troops there, doing all the stuff we're doing there. And especially given the fact that we can't do that now because we've given all of our weapons to Ukraine.
Right.
So anyways, that's kind of a rant. I apologize. But there's a lot going on there, and it is something that's not being talked about, and we have no perspective on this as a country. We just hear it and we just blank it out, and it's the most important issue facing the world right now. We got nuclear armed, countries, face to face, UFC pre-bout face to face, and the history of humankind is on the line. And we're I don't know. Kim Kardashian did something this week. It's I don't know. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I think the question a lot of people probably have is, well, then what do we do about it? Because the people in charge are obviously the ones flirting with this utter disaster. So what role do we have to play? And I'm not asking you for an answer.
Yeah.
That's somewhat rhetorical because it's a big question.
Well, I do have some prescriptions, but I don't know. I gotta do some more work on it. Cause I one of the things I actually listened in on this week, the Quincy Institute, it was great think tank, had a really interesting discussion this week about a more America first, realism, real restrained vision for Chinese relations. Because, China has a tremendous amount of disincentives to a lot of bad behavior, right? And we tend to, in our foreign policy dialogue, especially Republicans right now, tend to really underplay that and really overplay the bad things they're doing. They do bad things. I'm an anti-government guy, right? I'm a small government guy. There's no way the Chinese communists are close to my vision right here. All I'm asking is what is the role of America in this role in the world? And to me, it isn't clear that the current pathway is actually doing us a lot of good. Obviously, strategic ambiguity for Taiwan's probably better than what Trump did, which was more we're going to defend Taiwan to the last man sort of thing. And Biden's kind of reestablished that, so there's some credit there, right? We want to actually keep it vague about what our commitments are because then they can't play against us. Think about it like a chess. You don't want to do is overposition. You want to keep your options open so that you're not vulnerable, right? If you overposition, then you've limited your options. You're too far across the board. You can't do anything. So the question is our overall strategic placement available or possible to actually defend against an expansion from China, right? Probably not.
Right. No, we're all over the place.
Right.
We're way overextended.
So the first question has to be that meta strategy question, and backing up to there and saying, what is the purpose of U.S. foreign policy? How do we guarantee American safety and security and freedom? Right. How do we do that with our foreign policy? Well, it's probably not that one we're doing right now in a whole bunch of dimensions that we've covered on the podcast. But when it comes to China, a few things specifically is empowering South Korea and Japan, key allies in the area that are democratic and friendly and actually have stake here. Right. What was the best response to, if you could roll back the clock on our relationship with Russia to the early 2000s, what was the best way to deal with Russia, knowing what we know now? Well, it obviously wouldn't have been saying, hey, Ukraine, come into NATO. It would have been saying, let's repurpose NATO into a trade bloc and let's drop all the militarism of it. Let's not do all this stuff with NATO. Let's not do the stuff in the Middle East too, please. And then and let's empower those people to have a stake in their own security. So we're not subsidizing Germany with security guarantees. Instead, Germany's defending Germany and Germany's interests. That way, the Minsk Accords might have gotten enforced. Because when the Minsk Accords came across, Germany didn't have any incentive to actually enforce it because they didn't have any military stake in it. Well, they had incentive, but it was like an indirect incentive. They wanted the natural gas, but they didn't want the potential spiraling of violence. So because of our, and not just exclusively because, but at least a component to our actions in this space, was us saying that we could handle it all, and we can't. And it would make more sense to allow the people who are more directly affected by this do more to guarantee their security in their region. And there could be a role for America in that. I mean, we have the best arms in the world, so maybe that's what we do, right? But I'm not sure that the more expansionist, neoconservative, aggressive, warhawk stuff that's been our policy for a very long time now has been working. So we need a new direction. I think China's a good example of that, especially when it comes to our relationship with Japan and South Korea. Because right now, Japan probably would like a larger army, but we won't let them have one.
Right. Well, it is working for someone. Our policy is working for someone. And it's the people that make the weapons, as we often point out on the show. I want to make sure that we have time to get to Kyle's wheelhouse here, because there's some interesting news coming out of the SEC. Do you want to jump into that?
It's the aftermath of the SEC stuff. So like last week I talked about how the SEC was cracking down on Coinbase and Binance, which are two major crypto exchanges. They were basically saying that they're illegally trading unregistered securities, blah, blah, blah. It tanked the crypto market. 1 week later now, and I think this is a perfect example of understanding how these entities tend to operate, is you have BlackRock applies for a Bitcoin ETF, which is essentially it's a financial instrument for people to be able to invest in Bitcoin. And then you have Fidelity and a bunch of these like Charles Schwab and a bunch of these other big entities that people have probably heard the names of and don't really understand what they do, are basically launching crypto exchanges. So you end up having a week ago, it was like, oh no, it's the end of crypto. Everybody's going to have to move overseas, all of these businesses, and everybody's super concerned about it. And then 1 week later, all the major, the strongest financial institutions in the country are all like, hey, we're getting on board with this crypto thing. And then price is the highest it's been. Bitcoin's the best performing asset of the year right now.
Wow.
So
we are not financial advisors.
No, but no, just like by the numbers, it's the highest performing asset of any asset in right now.
I'm just joking.
No, he's not joking. We are not financial advisors.
No, I mean, we're not joking about not being financial advisors.
I'm misspeaking constantly through that. My bad.
Yeah, but no, it's worth noting how these institutions operate. Is there direct collusion that's happening here? Is there kind of like, hey, FUD the market? FUD is fear, uncertainty, doubt. It's a finance term. It's interesting seeing how this is all playing out. Like pretty much everyone that I know in the crypto space, everybody's just like, wow, this is just blatantly corrupt.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about the crypto space is for so long it doesn't have a lot of regulation. Obviously, that's the whole
the whole point
basis of this SEC lawsuit is like, well, the rules are so unclear, but that's allowed for there to be a lot of market manipulation by some of the bigger players in the space. And now it just looks like these traditional financial institutions are coming in and saying, well, if you guys can make money manipulating the market, maybe we'll do it too. And maybe we'll do it, with the help of the SEC coming in and spreading some FUD, whether that was, collusion or not, if they were just opportunistically taking advantage of that. It seems like they've come in and tried to, it has obviously juiced the market. Whether or not they've benefited from that, I don't think we know.
It's worth noting too. This is something that I didn't have on here, but there is kind of BlackRock is an interesting institution, very interesting institution. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, is like the whole ESG thing that's become part of public parlance now. That's his baby. Like this is his thing, is the ESG standards being put on businesses as basically this bullying tool of saying like what you can and can't do and trying to make everybody socially accountable and all this stuff, all these words. When I first learned about ESGs, it was because of BlackRock trying to enter the space in 2018. Like they were looking at putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet, all this stuff, and this was always a big thing for the crypto people of like. One of the biggest things that's going to send us to Valhalla on the price is that all these big institutions are going to start buying it. Like they're going to do this Michael Saylor strategy of just buying a bunch of Bitcoin and using it as like a hedge against inflation. So what you ended up having is BlackRock and Larry Fink is basically just like saying Bitcoin is environmentally unfriendly. It's not good for ESG scores. So what you end up having is all these companies, they go to miners and they're saying like, hey, we really want to buy Bitcoin, but it's not green. Can you guarantee us that these virgin coins, recently mined Bitcoins, are green? And so all these miners are like, okay, we'll put a bunch of solar panels, we'll do all this stuff, and we'll mine green Bitcoin. But you're gonna have to buy that green Bitcoin at a premium. So it's basically like you end up having like two different types of Bitcoin. It's like dirty Bitcoin and green Bitcoin. And all these companies are like, no, but we want the other price of Bitcoin. They're like, no, sorry, you're gonna have to buy at a premium. So then all these companies didn't do anything. So you end up seeing how the incentive structures of ESGs. This is why, like I've said on this podcast, is I've always thought that ESGs were like a Trojan horse that are purposely designed for creating bad incentives that create malinvestment in the economy, which then leads to banking collapses and things like that. Like I think it's an actual like tool for destabilization.
Well, it's causing companies to act contrary to their best interests.
Exactly.
I mean, a perfect example is this Bud Light thing where they pissed off conservatives and like. I mean, conservatives are like have to be the bread and butter customer of a Bud Light product, right? You can't think of a NASCAR race without thinking of a Bud Light. There's a lot of conservatives at a NASCAR race.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be, judgmental or anything.
Well,
like that.
you had the vice president, right, being like, we want to get away from the frat boy culture.
Well, right.
Stuff,
that was the VP of in the marketing department who okayed the whole Dylan Mulvaney campaign that caused them so much flack. I mean, I think Target is sort of somewhat of a different issue, but similar, right? Like it caused a huge backlash. Because they're trying to do all these things to make sure they have the right ESG score, they're doing the right things socially. And if that's like core to your company's values and your customers understand that, that's one thing. But to be a corporation understanding, okay, I have to align myself with this philosophy if I want to get funding from some of these huge asset managers, if I want to be invested in by, in their part of their portfolio of publicly traded companies, I have to follow the rules. I have to cross these T's and dot these I's. It's actually damaging their relationships with their customers. It's damaging their core business. It's damaging their stock prices. It's doing all these things that are causing their companies to go down, which I've heard from people, this theory that it's actually a means of actually tearing down the American economy, like overall. I think
there's something to it.
It gets into some maybe more conspiratorial space, because there's a lot of factors in play there and a lot of coincidental stuff, or circumstantial stuff rather. But you have the situation where these companies are acting against their own best interest, and it is just going to slowly but surely kind of bring them down from
if they didn't have the standard that they would have to go with, you wouldn't be seeing all this like crazy woke HR structures that are happening. Like everybody's trying to get their proper diversity score and everybody's trying to do all this stuff. So they're making decisions they otherwise wouldn't have made that would result in better profit margins. And same with the environmental stuff. It's like now we got to be concerned about all this green, all this stuff, and everything. And what you end up having is like, where's the shareholder value on that?
Right.
Is like to me, it seems like if you're following these scores, you're anti-shareholder value. I think shareholders should be demanding that you're not going against these.
But it's the best way to get an infusion of loan, right? And that's the capital play in this, right? You get a high ESG score, so you're more likely to get financing, which raises your stock price, which means you can sell your stock price. And like, it's the financialization focus that is inherent in having. It wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't mention monetary policy. When you have a monetary policy as such that we do, it places an overemphasis on finance and less emphasis on savings and production. Debt and finance go up, savings and production go down. When you have artificially low interest rates over 100 years, that's the inevitable result. So a long time ago, I was mentioning like we don't know the incentive structure of what it means to individual psychologies to have low interest rates for a very, very, very long time, of how many things down the line of human behavior that changes. And maybe one of the things that it changes is this structure that says it's way more important for shareholders, boards, executives, all that kind of stuff to care about ESG scores than to care about the value that they deliver to their customers. Because to them, financialization is way more important than production.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's completely right.
Another part of this dynamic that I think is interesting is your theory of it's like built on. There's this lady. She has this. It's a thing called "Everything is a Scam." Right? Have you guys ever heard of this?
No.
Everything is a scam.
Yeah, everything is a scam, right? So like the licensure for your business, for your that you want to go into, it's a scam. It doesn't actually guarantee safety. There's actually a ton of studies about that. Licensure, it actually doesn't improve safety. It actually just increases prices and keeps low income and less qualified, less asset, wealthy people out of that market. Another one would be like colleges. How much of it is a scam? Can you really do it? Does it really cost $60,000 to go to college? Can you get a better job doing it less? It's another kind of like, she doesn't mean overt scam, but it's kind of like everything's scam. So you expanded on that, and it's everything is a syndicate.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a syndicate or a cult.
Yeah,
right?
everything is
it's one of the two.
You need to unpack that for everybody. I think this exactly touches on that idea, right? Because it's like, this is kind of one of those scams, right? It's kind of one of those things that indicate the old money kind of grift on the system, trying to keep new money out, right? See, Coinbase is the new money, right? And then you have these existing financial regimes that have exactly the same licensure, exactly the same, selling exactly the same product, but one is on the outside because they're the new money, and they're on the inside, and they have the regulators, and they're the old money.
Okay, I have two directions. Do you want to say something
I just
first?
want to make one minor adjustment to that. I think that they aren't selling the exact same products. The main point is that they're only selling they're only offering trading of the exact crypto assets that are not securities according to the SEC.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So
like Bitcoin
this exchange, it's supposed to be like Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, and Ethereum, because sometimes that's considered a security and sometimes it's not.
Right.
It's very unclear, Mr. Gary Gensler.
It doesn't invalidate your point, but really what it is these big players letting the new money take the fall, get sued by the SEC. Whether or not there's any collusion there, we don't know. But then saying, okay, well, these are the ones that are safe to play with. Cool. We know what the rules are now, at least enough to say we'll jump in here and not everywhere else.
Well, and I think, there's two different directions I could go with this. One, the first thing is, if you're using crypto through these entities, you are not using crypto right. You are going to be giving these entities full custody of your coins, and you are not. The whole purpose of Bitcoin is that you can be your own bank. And what you're effectively doing is you're asking BlackRock to be your bank and be your custodian for your Bitcoin, and they will have complete control over it. So like they'll be able to censor you, they'll be able to stop you. You're basically just going. You're going to be going from like, oh, I'm going to have my cash at Wells Fargo to I'm going to be having my Bitcoin with BlackRock. Like you're not doing crypto right if you're doing this. It's nonsense. But I think that there's a thing. I think there is kind of a game theory play here that is these entities want to take control as much of the market as they can. And especially if you're a proof of stake network, unlike Bitcoin. So this is going to be technical. There's coins that there's different validation mechanisms. My computer is sending me notifications. There's different validation mechanisms for like what keeps the network secure, and one is proof of work, which is what Bitcoin operates, and this is what the mining thing is. I won't go too deep into that, but it's like you're mining Bitcoin and you're validating the network and you're making it secure. Others are proof of stake, which is basically you're putting financial stake of the coins into these nodes that are the governing structure of the network. So if these entities start accumulating and being the custodians over all of these different people's coins, and they're the ones that are staking the currency, they're going to have the most voting rights on the network. And Ethereum is a proof of stake network as of last year. So there's some game theory elements of why I would be very skeptical of using these financial instruments that these companies are putting. But also in regards to your syndicate thing, we also had the James O'Keefe stuff that came out where he caught. He's a kind of low level on the totem pole. He caught this guy who's a recruiter for BlackRock on a date, because That's not a date. That's James O'Keefe.
we got to pull up that meme where it's like it's James O'Keefe and it's like very clearly a dude dressed in drag.
It's like, that's not a hot girl. That's James O'Keefe. But the guy was just saying, and a lot of this is him being probably hyperbolic and stuff like that. But I think it does showcase the mentality that even a kind of a low-level HR recruiter type of person at BlackRock has of being like, oh, war is good for us. War is good for making money. And it's like, it's actually not that hard to buy a politician. It's only like $10,000 for a senator, right? Like these are the types of things that he was saying, right? But it shows like how mob-like these entities really operate as like all these they're just mafias. They're just syndicates. Like, and when you start to look at things that way, like the world becomes so much more clear. Especially when you see all these government agencies with the SEC and the CFTC and the FCC and all the alphabet letters, right? Like all of it just comes down to is like they are just bullying their weight around on things. Totally. It's not.
Well, and you see the culture of that kind of entity through the eyes of even this low-level guy, who the way he's speaking in these interviews or in these hidden camera interactions with this person he's on the date with, he's all focused on like domination and like, what did he say? It was like every day I'm deciding people's fates or something to that effect. He's like, he has these airs of just power and he's just like drunk on it. You can just tell he just revels in that, like that place of knowing he has something over someone else. And wherever that comes from, I don't know, but I think that that's indicative. If someone at the very bottom of that totem pole acts that way, it has to be pervasive, that it's attracting people like that from the very bottom up.
It's just a big part of Wall Street culture too. Like, all these people are like this. Like I've talked with people like this. Like they have these mentalities. It's not that crazy.
I just think he read the Gorilla Mindset, and that's what it was.
He's just Mike Cernovich on this.
Sorry, I had to make fun of that again.
But it also comes down to I think in the structure of like the people that are running for public office, people like RFK Jr., people like Vivek Ramaswamy, Trump to a large degree as well, I think kind of operates in this mindset. Like, are you breaking the illusions that people have about these systems? Like, because so many people have this fantasy view of what politics is. They have this like utopia, this naive utopian vision of just like, oh, we're going to create the perfect society and things like this. No, politics is a blood sport where everybody is just like trying to dominate each other. That is what politics is. And what I am most interested in, it's not like, oh, do you have the perfect nuanced view of tax policy and stuff like that? That's not the thing that I care about for the people that are running for president. I care about the people that are kind of putting this vision forward that is exposing these systems for what they are in a very realistic, practical sense of like understanding that these are all just syndicates. This big structure that we have that we call the state or call government is just like this religious, this mafia that we've developed a religion around, and everybody has this blind faith towards it. Of like, oh, we have to have this because it's just for some reason, like, everybody's wearing suits and everybody's proper. They're making the correct decisions for us. Like, anything that's exposing that is like, that's the people that I'm the most interested in right now. And you see them. These are also the people that are getting censored. They're the people that get all the investigations on them. They're the ones that get the indictments. They're the ones that go through car rides in Dallas, right? Like they are the ones that do this stuff. And you have to understand how mobsters work.
Yeah.
And this is how it works.
Okay.
Whoo!
Gonna get dark for
Fire.
a second. What are the odds RFK makes it through 2024?
Wouldn't it be wild? Like just as a historical phenomenon, JFK, RFK Jr.
I don't know. I no comment.
I know. Me
It's
either,
a very
actually.
different age, though, too. I mean, think about the difference in media now. It's gonna be a lot harder to get away with, right? How much information?
No, I don't know, dude. The Clintons do it all the time.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
Epstein
We still
did not
don't know
kill
much
himself.
about the shooter in Las Vegas. Like that was.
Ooh, yeah. We thought we were deprioritized now, but
Yeah,
what was his motivation?
I
Evan.
don't know.
He was his dad didn't love him, and I think
No, that's a very interesting story. White pill.
white pill. Yeah,
White pill. All right. I want to tell you a story.
buckle up.
Your
kids.
local government, your state government, whatever. This is London, so it's what it is. Unitary
You got to
government.
do it in a British accent.
Oh. Ultra low emissions zone cameras are used in London.
I'm actually
okay.
gonna veto that.
yeah, let's not do that.
Okay, so they install these new cameras, right? They're ultra low emission cameras that are used in London to scan number plates and automatically find people who drive cars that don't meet emission standards. They find them 12 pounds, 50 ounces. It's another Cass Sunstein thing, right? Nudge. That's the word I was looking for. That's a nudge. Nudge regulation. A group of citizens started taking them down illegally. So I'm not encouraging anyone to violate the law, but they take them down. They call themselves, this is the best part, Blade Runners. Now, that's a very specific reference to a movie and a science fiction novel. Yeah, very cool. So these guys, basically, they have that, they hate it, they don't like it, so they start taking these down and they start publishing it on deep web stuff about what they're doing. And they literally have like dozens of these
I saw the
cameras.
video on Instagram. Yeah. Guy with like a whole garden shed full of these things. They're all pretty big. I mean, it's I don't even know. It's like the size of a mailbox or something like that, and just like full.
It's a wild story, man.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
awesome,
talk about
though.
had enough and just like, and especially something so petty and tyrannical in like this petty way.
But that's not petty though. $12.50 a day.
Yeah.
If you're driving a car that doesn't meet emission standards, that's I mean, just do that math over a month. That's rent. That's utility bills. That's so much money.
Oh, we got the video here.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. I don't have the sound on because I don't think the sound probably matters.
He's
but
basically
you kind of
just
see that
yelling.
he has all of it right here.
Yeah,
British,
we're looking at
British
it.
C words all throughout.
Oh, this is all I use.
10 mil socket. 10 mil socket, guys. That's the key.
But very interesting. Very interesting.
I had trouble figuring out what. Oh yeah, and then a T30, 10 mil socket and a T30.
Smart man using gloves. Yeah. So it's what's so wild about it is just that you guys remember when Domino's started like fixing potholes? Yeah. Do they still do that?
Domino's Pizza?
Yeah.
I do remember that.
They had like an actual truck that was labeled as Domino's that was laying the asphalt down and everything.
And fixing
Really?
potholes. Yeah.
I mean, that's genius marketing.
Right. I mean, as far as like, there's obviously that's the legal thing to do. So do more of those and less of the illegal
I'm actually
thing.
not so sure it's legal. I think there was a guy somewhere arrested for filling potholes in his own town.
Yeah, actually, Arnold Schwarzenegger was doing that just recently. Yeah, I saw him on Twitter. Yeah, he was like filling in a pothole because the local government wouldn't do it. I mean,
Yeah, there was a guy who did that, and then I'm pretty sure he got fined or something like that.
yeah.
Anyways.
There was another cat who was. They were going to build a little stair into a park that he lived by, and they were going to It's going to cost like the local government like $3 million to do it. And he went out and he spent a couple $100 and built it himself. They took down the stairs that he built and fined him, and then they spent the millions of dollars on it to do it themselves.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Government.
But that is white pill right there. You just do it, and maybe you eat a fine, but damn it, you are a story. You're a story of inspiration of people actually just taking control of their local community.
Yeah.
Doing the right thing.
Another white pill. This is a shift from here, and we don't have it in the notes. But I just got back from Canada, and
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I had like at least
So-
I had like at least 16 different unique people saying like I just live in a communist country. like it was like a very weird. No, but like something I will say is like the mentality in people that I noticed since like stuff like the trucker rally and things is like a lot of Western Canada right now, they're kind of going through like almost like a 10th Amendment type of thing. Like the 10th Amendment, America is states' rights, and states kind of being able to take control of their state from the federal government. There's like very much this provincial rights attitude that's happening in places like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, places like that, which are that's middle Canada. Like I'm from like the Kansas of Canada.
Fly over Canada.
fly over Canada. But it was just very interesting to see people's kind of mentality on this. Is like for instance, I think it was the premier of Alberta, or maybe it was like the mayor of Calgary or something. I can't remember. Got banned from Twitter recently, and is like a super conservative person. Just like while I was there, got banned from Twitter.
Oh wow.
But it's interesting to watch just like the frame of mind that I'm seeing in people being like, we are so done with everything that happened over the last few years in Canada. And it's like we are like taking our provinces back, kind of a mentality. Like there's a very much like this nullification idea that is permeating through Western Canada right now.
That's awesome.
That I just noticed.
A little Canadian reporting.
Yeah.
Exclusives. Hot on the news.
Hot on the news,
Canada.
directly from Canada. Just got back.
Hey, it's important to know something about our neighbors to the north.
I'm
No,
glad
but
you
it
pulled
is
out.
it is that thing is like the trucker rally thing it seems to have been it's been a major event. Like I'm just seeing it everywhere. Like, like we talked about like the Bitcoin conference happened and RFK spoke about it. It's talking about freedom of money and stuff. Like that was a very central message that happened there. Like that Canadian trucker event was like a major shift in a lot of people's minds, it seems like, on just a lot of issues.
Yeah, I mean, they were going after people's kids.
Well, they were shutting people's bank accounts down. And things,
for
right?
protesting
Like,
the government.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, and you were saying something too about the firearms regulations there.
Yeah, we were talking about that beforehand. Is the handgun? I had some family telling me about like the specific details of it. Is like, yeah, you can't buy or sell firearms anymore. Like if you have a registered firearm, or specifically handgun, like you can sell shotguns, rifles, AR-15s are banned. But handguns, if you are licensed with a handgun, you are the last owner of that handgun. It gets turned in after you die. You don't have to turn it in now. It gets turned in after you die. You can't. There's no inheritance for it. It can't be passed down to your children. Like whoever is the licensed,
the government's going to be there after you die.
Yeah.
Like, where's the handgun?
Whoever's licensed with the handgun, and you are the last person to own that.
Yeah, Grandpa said he lost it in an unfortunate boating accident.
Dude, so many boating accidents happening in the lakes around Manitoba right now. It's like
Guns just littered on the bottom of lakes everywhere. Oh boy. Well,
So one more white pill.
Yeah.
Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg fighting.
I'm all for watching billionaires and politicians duel each other. I want to bring it back. This is
When
late,
did we have it?
This is late
it's
stage.
real life celebrity deathmatch.
Well, this is
only
like
a little bit less than
90s
deathmatch.
kids will get it, right? I'd be like, oh man, we need a claymation.
this is like late
the
stage
whole
Rome,
thing.
right? It's like late stage Rome. It's like very bread and circus. I love
Oh,
it.
sure.
I'm digging it.
Absolutely. We'll take that kind of circus for sure. I think we should put Biden and RFK in a ring. See what happens.
RFK's fit. Like if you see that picture of him next to
yeah,
Rogan,
he's
you're
jacked.
like, woo,
Good.
Yeah, he's like 60 years old, looking good.
Probably that TRT.
Yeah, it's just- probably.
I don't know, but probably.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He's
That
got
said,
no jabs
fighting
in him.
Biden can't walk.
I know. He would just like kind of help him to the edge of the ring, and just like help him out. And be like,
He'd trip on the stairs trying to get in.
He'd never make it in. Break a hip immediately.
hot take from F.
Oh, you get into the ring and be like, "Where's Jill? I don't know where to go."
All right, this is elder abuse. We got to stop.
Oh,
We're ageist
We
right
only
now.
get 20 seconds of.
did you guys
Biden
see the video of him
abuse.
pledging allegiance to the Indian flag with his hand over his heart, and then he realizes it and he's like, very slowly moving it down like no one's gonna notice. It is the most awkward, hilarious.
I haven't
It mostly
seen
because
that.
I can sympathize, right? Because he's probably not thinking about it, and he just put his hand up there and he's like, oh, this is the wrong one. How do I get away with it? I can't just yank it down. Everyone will notice. So he just very slowly moves it down. And the funniest, it's a Friday, guys. We got to laugh a little bit, especially
Okay.
watching the world
I found
burn.
it.
Watching blow it up, Kyle.
Sorry.
It's like, ah, fuck.
Realize it yet?
No. He looks very stoic, very stern, like he's about to cry. He's like, wait, I don't recognize this song.
got the Clint Eastwood.
Oh.
He's got the Clint
we're
Eastwood
just
face
gonna-
going on right now.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah, that's some Gran Torino Biden right there.
That's funny.
Oh man, he had a bunch of those this week, man.
Looks
It
like
was-
he was about to salute it at first. The way he moves his hands.
this whole diplomatic thing with India was a smorgasbord of funny Biden clips.
Well, I
out
saw
of this
that.
whole
I saw
thing.
a clip where they were walking down a carpet, like a very ceremonial moment, and he didn't know to let go of the prime minister's hand or president. I'm not sure. Is it a prime minister in India?
Prime Minister.
Yeah. Didn't know to let go of his hand, so he's just like holding hands with Jill and the prime minister of India, like walking down this carpet. I mean,
Just weird,
just old Grandpa Joe.
just doing grandpa stuff.
See, and this is the sad part. Is like really like we can laugh about it because he is the president, but like, man, people need to be real. Like this guy needs to be in a rocking chair on a porch somewhere, right? Like telling his grandkids stories. I don't actually know that he has grandkids, does he?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He needs to be doing old man shit,
Yeah.
not trying to look like he's still running this country when we all know he's not. And it's the people behind him pulling the strings and doing the stuff.
Yeah, it's a strange moment. Imagine how this is going to be read about 50 years from now. And be like, yeah, we had this president, and he probably had dementia. He had the memory of a fly. His own words.
Did he say that?
You gotta find that clip. He's like, what about your memory? He's just like, I can't. When I think about, I don't even have the memory of a fly, but I can do everything I used to do.
Oh, that's right. When they're talking about his mental acuity, are you
Yeah.
still sharp? And he's like, no. Basically,
I mean, he's 80 years old. Like,
I mean, it's and I don't want to be an ageist about it. And I mean that really honestly. I mean, like, there's plenty of people who at the age of 80 are very sharp and are capable, right? But this guy, I mean, he's having a hard time, and I really feel bad for him that he feels like he has to run again. I mean, and he doesn't have a VP that probably can win, I guess. I mean, she's not very popular. She's not coming across well, and so he's in a spot where he feels like he's got to run again at his age.
I don't know that he.
I don't know
really
if he feels
even-
like he has to run again. I think that there's a lot of like I remember I said this back in 2020. Like I always believed that like the Burisma stuff that was going on was like a core reason that he was still running. Like it had to do with this Burisma stuff. Like I think there was a lot of things about like cover-ups and
It was either that or they're going to come down on him.
yeah, it was kind
That
of
sort of
like
thing.
this type of stuff. And he's just like a core establishment person in regards to these things.
Well,
Like,
I
they
think
needed to
that-
have him
that's-
before.
Yeah, that's the bigger thing is that his team, his cabinet, no, he's just kind of the perfect front guy. Like he doesn't probably have much to offer in terms of policy suggestions. He's not going to be putting up, any sort of fight over the things that they want to accomplish. That he's just the guy that walks around and does the ceremonial stuff while they're back there accomplishing whatever
Which is
agenda
all
they
the,
want.
which is really all the president's job is.
Well,
at the end of the day.
the James O'Keefe BlackRock guy, one of the things he said was it's not the president, it's the guy who's holding the president's wallet.
Yeah, which I think is
True.
completely accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's accurate. And then it's also, there has been a lot of reports about just how political the Biden office is. Politico had some stuff on this. It was very interesting because a lot of positions that typically would be more career positions have been filled with political people. And it's a very dangerous thing when you think, especially about foreign policy. But what that means when you're making policy in international relations with people who are, I mean, honestly, they're like me. They're like political. They're like campaign people. They're not even policy people, right? I'm kind of split in half like that. They're campaigners, right?
David,
Put into that kind of role.
I would be so much more at peace if you were involved making decisions.
I could never get a
in the White
security
House.
clearance ever. That would
I'd rather
never
have you
happen.
Treasury Secretary than.
But that's the question: is to what degree do we see the policies coming out of Biden actually him? What's actually the policy? What's actually the interest group? Those become so much weaker when you have a president who doesn't seem to know where he's at most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, like at least the role should be like a CEO. It should be, I'm not doing a lot of the direct work. I'm kind of directing other people to do the work, right? That's I mean, leadership in a large organization would look
which
like
I think
that way.
is what the fundamental problem with the Trump presidency was I think he thought that's how it worked.
Yeah.
And then he realized, though, these people aren't going to listen to me.
Yeah. Well, additionally to that, he had a terrible vetting process apparently, right? He just didn't know who to hire, who would actually be aligned to his values to take that out. Now, he did do some good. Like look at the regulatory regime change. Look at the stuff that he did in energy. Look at all that stuff. He did a lot of great things within hiring the right people to do those things. Now, the biggest problem, obviously, the biggest obvious problem, foreign policy and COVID, right? Where he just could not make the right hires and couldn't seem to change
Well,
course.
yeah, he somehow magically found, like, he ended up having the right guy, like, after the election was lost in 2020.
Right.
Like Douglas McGregor came in for like 3 weeks right
Yeah.
at the end of the presidency, and he was like the guy that should have been there from the beginning.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. But instead, he was a lure by Mad Dog Maddox and that guy on Fox News I listen to sometimes.
John
you know.
Bolton.
Yeah.
It's like as soon as I saw John Bolton, I was like, oh well, John McCain's in here. I was like, then afterwards, I'm like, okay, I think Trump's trying to actually fight back against his administration, but it's kind of Trump's fault for putting himself in the position where he had to fight against his administration.
Yeah. But that was probably he was not just an outsider to the Republican Party. He was also an outsider to conservative politics. And especially in the conservative wing, the old right wing that was also more aligned with his own foreign policy point of view. He didn't know any of those guys, right? So he didn't know who to select. And all the people around him were all more establishment GOP people. who only know their own guys. I mean, all of this stuff works by who you know.
Well,
Even in DC at the highest levels, there's no job posting on Indeed for Secretary of Defense.
Well, and this was the big problem too, is like all the conservatives were on board with John Bolton because he was like a Fox News guy,
Right.
and they didn't like if you were a libertarian and in libertarian circles, and you read a bunch of Rothbard, like you knew who John Bolton was,
Yeah, right.
like you knew exactly what was going to happen, and the libertarian wing of the party is like, no, don't do that,
Yeah.
and then the conservatives like, no, John Bolton's the good guy. Trump picked him. He's going to be good, and
that
then we watched. Yeah, I was like,
Good man.
he's the mustache. It's like, but then Bolton betrayed him, and everybody's like, see, all these conservatives come out and they're like, see, I told you John Bolton was bad. It's like, no, you didn't. I remember having these conversations with you. You did not. You were completely head over heels about John Bolton because he's the Fox News guy.
Well, how much clout does Fox News have now with conservatives?
Well,
Has that changed?
Tucker Carlson, I think, put a big. I think Fox is dead.
there's-
Nail in the coffin.
I think the last of it is it dies off with the old generation.
Well, there's a whole thing with Matt Walsh doing. There's something about like they're forcing pride. They're forcing like the.
Oh yeah, I did see that. How they're
Fox
they're
News.
they're forcing all their employees to do a lot of take all these courses or
I think
sensitivity
they're
training
trying to moderate.
Yeah.
But that's something they've been doing for a long time now. Anyway, it's not.
Most large corporations do that.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
not-
and like
it's not news.
sensitivity training. Like, does it do what it says it does? Does it increase tolerance and sensitivity? I don't.
Well, I doubt it,
evidence is
but
there.
I think the
Was it
reason it's
genuine?
a story is because it's not genuine to the narrative that Fox was, or maybe
Well,
is
I
kind of pushing.
I think the
right?
kids are gonna be trying to sell off Fox at some point, so they have to moderate Fox to be more viable as a buyout
Sure.
in the future.
Yeah,
I think that's more
less
so what's
offensive
happening.
to advertisers.
And frankly, I think that's what's happening with a bunch of these, like CNN, MSNBC. Everybody seems to be moderating a bit. Like everybody's taken away out their more extreme figures right now, and everybody's trying to moderate down. And I think there's going to be a bunch of sell-offs that end up happening down the road.
more consolidation beyond just the
Yeah,
six giant
or a
corporations
transformation
that-
of the company or something. Just because, like if these entities do not change, they will die. Like,
Well,
that's just-
additionally, that accountability from decentralized, smaller news, right, and media is forcing this on those folks, right? Because like what you said earlier about Vice and BuzzFeed, those outlets all wrote the same article complaining about the same stuff every single week, and it was all the same narrative, and that's obviously uninteresting, and only a small group of people want to listen to that. So a lot of people are. I think the accountability from the new wave media is pulling these things apart and making it less what it's been traditionally.
Yeah.
Hopefully what they'll do is they'll take it in a more hard news directive, right? Where they're actually doing actual investigative reporting, actually trying to hold systems and institutions accountable.
Do you have any confidence that that's actually going to happen?
Well, I mean, they have when you think about comparative advantage, right? If you have a huge budget and a large corporate like infrastructure, you're much more able to do that than if you're just some rando, right? A lot
Well, yes,
harder
but
to
you're
do.
also, I mean, they're also so beholden to advertising dollars from
Yeah.
like pharma, for example, or
well,
military industrial complex that they can't stray very far from their prescripted narrative, or they're going to just talk themselves right out of a job.
Well, and remember, Vice's old motto used to be "We go there," because their entire business model is that we're going to actually do the hard hitting investigative journalism, send reporters out to X country or whatever like that. But then I think comes around culture change. I think Vice went public, didn't it? At some point, I can't remember.
I don't know.
But like you end up having all these incentives that just being like, well, let's not send people out anymore. Let's just get some clicks.
Let's
like,
blog.
It ends up being because like back in the day, remember like Tim Pool was a Vice reporter that
Mm-hmm.
went out to places, right? Like that was how Tim Pool became popular. Now he has like one of the biggest shows in the world now too. But I think that there is kind of this like shallowing out that tends to happen as you become more corporate. It's like what you need kind of is for these entities, like what you need is more like James O'Keefe's types of people, like these kind of like roguish figures if you're going to do investigative journalism. But as your institutions become more bureaucratic, you end up just getting LinkedIn professionals.
Right.
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 And LinkedIn professionals are good for safety. They're not good for like going out and doing something.
Hard hitting
Yeah.
content. Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I think that's what people want at the end of the day. I think that's it's not what ESG demands of these larger companies. So I think, that sort of they all become more and more vanilla the bigger they get. But I think that's why we're seeing them all fail.
Something I want to say about ESGs. ESGs are kind of on their way out. It is kind of just becoming a colloquial term for these types of standards that get put on. Like Larry Fink himself said that we're probably done with ESGs, but they're just going to do a bait and switch here. Like you're going to start seeing terms like sustainable capitalism and things like that
Prediction
that come up, and conservatives will be able to say like, yeah, we beat ESGs, and they're going to put this like high idol of like, look at, we beat it, but then there's just going to be a bait and switch that happens, and those will be the new things.
It was global warming until it was climate change.
Right.
And
Yeah.
now-
Yes.
and
Name
now-
changes. Right.
And now when it's 40 degrees out and almost July in Montana, where it should be 80 degrees every day, it's like 40 degrees when I woke up the other morning. It's climate change. It's not global warming.
And it's beauty. That's what it is. It's awesome. Keep it up, Montana.
Really?
Oh yeah,
you
man.
like 40-degree mornings?
Heck yeah, that's shorts weather, bro.
Dude.
I love it.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, it's
I
short.
got some meat on me, bro. I get hot.
That's fair. I got less, so I need a few more degrees. You know, a few more.
Now
Just a few
60's
more.
perfect. 60's perfect.
If it's above 32, it's shorts weather.
Look, 40 degrees is shorts weather. The first day, it's 40 degrees after being like 0 for 3 months. Okay, I will agree with you.
Your blood
there.
is acclimated to it.
Yeah, and you're like, oh my god, I'm on a tropical island right now. At this point, I want 75 and sunny.
So if you want us to hire a hard-hitting investigative journalist, please like, subscribe. I'm not committing to do that, but it'd be cool, right?
We need
please
money.
like, subscribe, and then comment and drive that algorithm for us. And
I'm going to add an
rank
addendum
us.
to that as well.
Yeah.
Since YouTube is totally going to just throw us out completely when they get wind of this podcast, which clearly they haven't yet because we're so small. Just go ahead and join us on Rumble because, just beat them to the whole like censorship thing.
You'll find all our videos on Rumble too.
Yes, they're all on Rumble as well.
And just other podcast places, Spotify, all these places.
Literally anywhere.
Yeah.
Like pretty much.
Just gotta get on Twitter next.
We're on Twitter.
Oh, we got to release on Twitter.
Oh, we don't release on Twitter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
eventually
we gotta
down
do
the road, I could see us doing like
A lot of people are moving there. I was impressed. Some
I
of the spaces and
imagine
stuff.
as the features start getting better. Like right now, it's still kind of awkward to do video on Twitter,
Mm.
but I imagine down the road, like year or two down the road, I think Twitter might be a viable YouTube competitor.
All right. Hopefully so. Somebody give them a run for their money because, I mean, I love YouTube. It's a great educational resource, but it's run by totalitarians. I hate that.
Knock it off, YouTube. Do better.
Do better.
All right. Well, hey, good show. Anything, any last notes before we wrap up?
I've been on enough rants.
Yeah.
That was a great podcast. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Later.
Thanks for tuning in to the Liberty Portal podcast. For more episodes, news, and Liberty-focused content, visit libertyportal.com and be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. If you like what you heard on the show, we appreciate you sharing it with your friends and giving us a review on your podcast platform of choice.